Welcome back. Finally, we're going to get to Merleau-Ponty, my favorite. So this is our little short course on phenomenology. So far, we looked at Kant and Hegel. With Kant, we introduced the notion of phenomenology. We studied all kinds of things, investigating the nature of our experience, but the real ultimate focus of it was to look at our experience of nature, to the phenomenology of our experience of nature as the object of our experience. With Hegel, again, we talked about a lot of things. We were officially looking at his self-consciousness chapter and so on. Lots of stuff came up there. But overall, what we were really doing is a phenomenology of our experience of freedom, our experience of our subjectivity. So we kind of got the object, what the ultimate object is, nature, and what the ultimate character of ourselves is as free beings, as subjects, namely our freedom. We did each of those two. Now, as you'll recall from Kant's third antinomy, those two don't fit together entirely comfortably. The experience of nature as an object and the experience of your own freedom. We noted that with Kant's third antinomy. And we pursued a particular theme based on that Kant about how those two experiences in a certain way can be compatible, like in the sense that you can have both. They both make sense. But we didn't really explore various other tensions and so on that come up there. That would be exciting to do. In fact, where we ended with Hegel, with the experience of unhappy consciousness, one version of which is the moral consciousness, we could have really pulled out some pretty interesting stuff there from the analysis of morality and what the relationship is between the world as the moral consciousness construes it and the world as the scientific consciousness construes it. That is to say, in the latter case, the one for whom nature is the ultimate object and the way things are, whereas the moral consciousness that more than the question of the way things are asks the question of the way things ought to be. And we could have looked at some of the complex and interesting way that those two things fit together. Hegel talks about that explicitly in his section of morality of his Phenomenology of Perception, and it's a pivotal theme in German idealism. In fact, Hegel, in talking about it, is probably not doing anything that's original, but is rather kind of condensing 20 years of that topic being debated in Kant and Kant's immediate followers. So in fact, I think the place where you see that played out probably most powerfully is in Fichte. I don't know Fichte's book, The System of Ethics, very well, but I know his Foundations of Natural Right, and it's definitely, that's a great book to look to. It's possible The System of Ethics is an even better book to look to, but I don't know it well enough to say that. But again, you'd find some pretty significant stuff about that in Kant, in the very same material we were looking at also, in the latter parts of the Critique of Pure Reason. Also, in part, when he talks about the postulates of practical reason and so on. We're not going to pursue it, but my point is just there's still a ton of stuff to investigate there if you wanted to. But what we did really, we just did our phenomenology of the experience of nature as object, and we did a phenomenology of the experience of our own freedom. Anyway, that's roughly where we've been. Now, as we turn to Merleau-Ponty, I want us to look at a place where those two themes come together, the kind of linking of nature and freedom, and that is in the experience of our own bodies. In as much as we think of the body as a part of nature, and in as much as the body is the site of our own freedom. So we're going to do, with Merleau-Ponty, we're basically going to be engaged in a phenomenology of the body, which means a study of what the body is as an experience, what the experience of the body is. And the phenomenology of the body, or the phenomenology of the experience of the body, that's probably Merleau-Ponty's greatest contribution. Merleau-Ponty, like Hegel and Kant, has tremendous insights to offer on every front, and so his insight into what the phenomenological method is, his insight into the character of sensation, sensory experience, his insight into whatever else, politics, all those things are great, and it'd be entirely worthwhile to study him just for those things. But the thing that he contributes, the content that he contributes to the great history of human philosophical endeavor is really the phenomenological exploration of the body. It's not new with him. The things he's talking about are very substantially discussed by Husserl in various places, as he consistently notes throughout, as Merleau-Ponty consistently notes throughout his own writings. And you would find versions of this in lots of other people. But Merleau-Ponty is really the one who, it seems to me, who made that a topic and who really brought its power into the philosophical world. And so that's roughly what we're going to study. Well, that is what we're going to study. We're not going to study all that, but that's the basic topic we're after here. So just as from Hegel, we only grabbed one section. So from Merleau-Ponty, we're only really going to grab this one section, and it's basically going to be part one of his book, Phenomenology of Perception, part one, which is called The Body. And so that's what we want to think about. And so I want to start at the beginning of part one. We'll be using this one. This is the translation by my friend Don Landis. There are many ways in which this is, I think, quite a nice translation. It's quite a nice book to use in lots of ways. There are some things about it that are frustrating. One of the things that's very frustrating is that the footnotes are all put at the back. They're put as endnotes. They're not footnotes, and that's too bad because they're such an integral part of the text that it's your experience of the book and of Merleau-Ponty's thought is kind of undermined by the situation where you almost certainly are not going to read them as they come up, and you're not really going to have them be integral to your experience of the chapter. The translation that this replaced by Colin Smith, in the earlier printings by Routledge, those footnotes were on the page, and it was much better to use. And then there are lots of things that Don has done in this translation that I think are good, and there are lots of things where I think, I like Colin Smith's better. That by itself is not a criticism or a condemnation. The thing that's frustrating is that Routledge, who owns all of these things, pretty much forces you to buy this translation now. I generally think it would be better if there were many translations available, and for many reasons, I think I would want to use the 1962 revised Colin Smith translation. And so, if you have a chance to get that, you might find it useful to read. There's a lot to learn just from the intelligence of the translator. The translation is in a certain sense already a kind of commentary, and that's a good one. It's a great contrast to Miller's translation of the Phenomenology, which is pathetic. Miller, it seems to me, pretty clearly does not understand what Hegel is talking about, and so his translation is like a bad commentary on the Phenomenology. There too, I actually, in many ways, prefer that very old translation by Bailey, which has got lots of inaccuracies, but Bailey understood, I think, much better what Hegel was doing, and so I think his translation, in many ways, is a better thing to read. Anyway, I'm looking forward to some new translations of Hegel coming out. I think Nicholas Walker is revising Miller's translation. That's going to be great. That will then suddenly be the best, I think. And you got lots of options for Kant, lots of good ones. But anyway, so like I said, this is the one we're working with, and so we're going to start. I want to start at the beginning of part one. I want to start with the very first sentence of Merleau-Ponty's introduction to part one of the Phenomenology of Perception, because it's going to remind us of some things we did before. It's just going to be a quick way to get into this topic. And what I want to do today is start there, and then I want to talk a little bit about the chapter called The Body, the Experience of the Body in Classical Psychology, and then my focus is going to be on Merleau-Ponty's discussion of the experience of the phantom limb and what that shows us about the nature of the body, the phenomenological relevance of that. And so we'll learn quite a bit about the nature of the lived body from that. And if there's time, I think I'll even push into a little bit of his discussion of lived space. So really what I'm hoping to look at is parts of the first three chapters of part one, The Body, which is kind of funny. With Hegel, I wanted to look at 6 paragraphs out of one chapter. Here I want to try to get through 3 chapters, but I mean that tells you something about the different character of some of these books. Anyway, so let's just start at the beginning of the introduction. And Merleau-Ponty says, this is page 69, our perception ends in objects, and the object, once constituted, appears as the reason for all the experiences of it that we have had or that we could have. Should be a familiar theme by now, right? That we've been looking at experience as the matrix. I don't even know what the right word is. The context within which the experience of an object comes to be. And so we have been talking about experience as something that can't really be explained by objects, but rather we have been trying to explain the nature of experience such there can be for us an object. I mean, we were pursuing that theme when we talked about Kant. We didn't use that language so much when we talked about Hegel, but that was at the heart of our discussion of Kant. But so that's what we're doing. But as we've said, repeatedly, our normal way of thinking is that object which experience gives us so perfectly seems to us like the thing that should explain our experience. So what is, loosely speaking, an effect of experience is treated as if it were the cause of experience. I say loosely speaking because that language of cause and effect isn't quite right, but it putting it in that sort of stark language, I think, just helps you to get the point. Anyway, as he says, our perception ends in objects, and the object, once constituted, appears as the reason for all the experiences of it that we have had or that we could have. And then in that same way, I actually wrote down the page number I want here. Oh yeah, I want to go back and just refer, I'm going somewhere else, but I remembered something else I wanted to say first. I'd like to go back to something from the very first chapter of this book, which is the first chapter of what Merleau-Ponty calls the introduction. The introduction here has 4 chapters. This is back on page 5 of our translation. That's the spot where Merleau-Ponty is actually first getting into talking about that issue of the way we misrepresent our experience by interpreting it on the basis of the objects it makes available to us. And in that context, he says, there's just an expression he uses which I like. So this is on page 5, and he says, unfortunately, this is one of the places where I disagree with Don's translation. So I'm going to read what I think it should say, and I'm really going to be taking Colin Smith's older translation. But so Merleau-Ponty says, about halfway down the page on page 5, the supposed evidence of sensing is not grounded upon the testimony of consciousness, but rather upon the prejudice in favor of the world, le préjugé du monde. Don translates that an unquestioned belief in the world, and I don't think that's actually what Merleau-Ponty is saying. I think the thing that Merleau-Ponty that makes it sound like, when you say the unquestioned belief in the world, that makes it sound like Merleau-Ponty is talking about the things that run-of-the-mill epistemological skeptics talk about, and where it hasn't occurred to this consciousness yet to say, does the world really exist? And so that's the kind of question that's of interest to people who operate with a representational theory of consciousness. But the point I was making from the very beginning is that phenomenology is precisely about why consciousness is not representational. Right? Those aren't the terms in which the phenomenological analysis of experience works. So I don't think that when Merleau-Ponty says le préjugé du monde, he's saying the unquestioned belief in the world, the prejudice that the world exists. And I think he means what I think Colin Smith nicely rendered, the prejudice in favor of the world, the prejudice of the world, that is to say, the prejudice that takes the world as it is given to be that which explains everything. Consciousness has been too easily convinced by the world and its rhetoric, and therefore is sort of blocked off from grasping what's really happening, and that's what phenomenology is going to correct. Anyway, so it's too bad I went back to a place where I'm actually going to quibble with the translation, but I do want to summon up that notion of what I will translate as the prejudice in favor of the world, because I think that is the thing we've been talking about all along, and that's what Merleau-Ponty is invoking here. So yeah, just to go back to what I said, our perception ends in objects, and the object, once constituted, appears as the reason for all the experiences of it. And then he says pretty much that same thing about the body, and that's what I wanted to get to. So on page 73, still in his little opening introduction to part 1, he says, on page 73, there's a new section that starts, there's the title of the second section in square brackets is The Problem of the Body. So I'll begin reading that. He says, obsessed with being and forgetting the perspectivism of my experience, I henceforth treat my experience as an object, and I deduce it from a relation among objects. And here we go. I consider my body, which is my point of view upon the world, I consider it as one of the objects of that world. That's the mistake most of us live from, and what the phenomenology of the body is going to have to completely correct and invert. Right. So we commonly interpret our own body as if it were, this is the kind of thing Sartre says actually very powerfully in Being and Nothingness, as if it were the thing the doctor is operating on the operating table, right? There, the doctor, the surgeon, is dealing with an organism, a piece of organic nature, and she or he or they have to understand the biological workings of the body as an organism, and that's going to be essential to being able to do whatever, your heart bypass surgery or your appendectomy or whatever else it is that's going on. And so there is, it really does matter in our world that the body of the human being is an organism that operates according to the rules of nature. True enough. But that's not, now phenomenologically speaking, that's not the body as I experience it. And we're going to go on and talk about what the body as I experience it is. But, I've talked in various other places about problems that come up when we try to interpret our experience on the model of objects. Well, here we're just saying that about our bodies, that when you think of your body as that little bit of anatomy or physiology, while it's not false, it's an interpretation of what's going on. Or rather, I should say, it's a one-sided and quite limited perspective on what's going on in your body, and it's not unambiguously, it's not unequivocally false, but it is at best misleading, and in other ways fundamentally obstructive of and contrary to the real meaning of your body as an experiential reality. And so that's what we want to talk about. And I just want to make one remark in passing. Because I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to take me to talk about things and just what I'm going to get through, I don't know if I'm going to come back to this or not. I'd really like to, though. The thing I'm going to mention is the thing that I'm really interested in, but I don't know if we're actually really going to get to it. But I just want to read a few more lines down. He says, likewise, I treat my own perceptual history as the result of my relations with the objective world. And then he says, then the sentence, my present, which is my point of view upon time, becomes one moment of time among all others. So he says about the experience of my own temporal present, the same thing he says, an analogous thing to what he says about the experience of my own body. At another point, he's going to say that actually also about the experience of here. So he's got my body, he's got now, and he's got here. And in each case, he's ultimately going to want to talk about a problem with understanding your body, your living body, you're living now, or you're living here, as just sort of one among many in a sort of indifferent universal objective scheme. Like I said, I don't know if I'm going to get to the business that particular point about time, but I'd like to. So I thought I'd mention it now in case I come back to it. But let's stick with the body, which is what I'm actually after here. So we want to now do a little bit of a phenomenology of our experience of the body, and we will see how different the body as it functions in our living experience is from that objective view of the body as a piece of anatomy. So the thing we're really going to talk about is now chapter 1, the body as object and mechanistic physiology. But before talking about that, I want to skip just to the beginning of chapter 2, the experience of the body in classical psychology, just because we want to talk about the body as we experience it. And Merleau-Ponty says a number of things here that are particularly clear, and I want to just pull some of those out now so you have them in mind before we then go back and look a little bit more at the chapter on the body as object, where the central part of our study there is going to be his analysis of the experience of a phantom limb. But let's just go to the beginning of chapter 2, which starts on page 92, the experience of the body in classical psychology. Let me just read you the first sign to begin with. The first sentence to begin with. He says, "When classical psychology described one's own body, it already attributed characteristics to it that are incompatible with the status of an object." So, in other words, he's saying he as a phenomenologist is not going out and just inventing new descriptions. He's saying, there's already a well-developed history in the context of classical psychology. Up to the mid-1940s when the book was written, but certainly since then too. There's already a well-developed body of literature attesting to the forms in which people experience their own body, and he's saying you don't have to just go up and make this up yourself. You can look at the things that have already entered into the annals of scientific inquiry, and you will see that when people describe the experience of the body, it reveals that is not compatible with what it is to be an object as we construe that. So he says, I'm just going to read a few of them, and depending again on how time goes, we may or may not come back and explore them more fully. But I want to name them just so you start thinking about it. He says, "It first claimed that my body is distinguished from the table or the lamp because my body is constantly perceived, whereas I can turn away from those other objects." So someone might say, yeah, well, it's an object that's always with me. But then he says, okay, but is it still then an object? And so he now wants to push, a sort of rigorous phenomenological question here. Okay, let's think phenomenologically about what it is for something to be an object, and see what phenomenologically what that means, and see if that then can fit with this description. Yeah, he says, and I guess I didn't feel like reading this whole paragraph. I thought I could figure out this sentence. Let me just skip to the last line of that first paragraph. You can read the whole thing, it's good. But it's just the last line. He says, in particular, the object is only an object if it can be moved away and ultimately disappear from my visual field. Its presence is such that it requires a possible absence. So he's talking phenomenologically about what you mean by having, an object of perception. And part of what it means is for that thing to be in the world is to be something upon which you can take a perspective. But precisely because your relationship to an object can always only be perspectival, that entails a few things. It entails that there are aspects of the object that you can't see. You'll always only see it from this side or at this time or in this lighting or something like that. But it also means that it's integral to the meaning of an object that you cannot see it, because it's part of the structure of the world that is indifferent to you, not part of the structure of your perspective. So part of what we mean for when we talk about something being an object of experience is that it is something that is independent of my perspective and not defined by it, and consequently, it is something that can disappear from my perspective. But in that case, if it is true that my own body is an invariant in my perceptual field, in the sense, I suppose, that I always have this visually available to me, and I guess I always feel something down here, and so on, and I can that can't disappear. That isn't just another instance of the same thing. That's a qualitatively different experiential reality. That's a different kind of thing than what we would normally take an object to be. So he says on top of 93, so the permanence of one's own body is of an entirely different type. It's not to be found as the result of an indefinite exploration. In fact, my own body defies exploration and always appears to me from the same angle. So it's a funny thing, right? An object normally is something you can explore. It can disappear from your view, and you can, go and get at it. Your own body can't disappear from view, never changes in respect to your view, and many aspects of it are not open to exploration. So he says, to say that my body is always near to me or always there for me is to say that it is never truly in front of me, which is pretty much what the word object really means. It means something thrown in front of you. It is never truly in front of me. I cannot spread it out under my gaze. It remains on the margins of all my perceptions. So that's got two features, margin and all. It remains on the margins of all my perceptions. It's not just a matter of this or that particular one, but it's always on the margins of it. It's never actually the thing I can truly put in front of me. And in that sense, he says, it is to say that it is with me. Right? That's a fundamentally different relationship than anything else could have. That's just a little bit more. And again, pushing this a little bit farther, about 3/4 of the way through that paragraph, this is actually 5, 10, about 15 or 16 lines up from the bottom. He says, the body's near presence and its invariable perspective are not a factual necessity, right? So you can notice that, it's necessary that my body always be there. You can describe it as a kind of necessity, yes, but he says it's not a factual necessity, since any factual necessity presupposes them. If we were using Kant's language, we would say it's not an empirical necessity, it's a transcendental necessity, right? In other words, it's not a necessity that is a necessity you discover about some characteristics of the objective world. No, it's not that. Indeed, from the point of view of the objective world, it's certainly not a necessity that your body exist at all. Right? The necessity that your body always be there for you is integral to the very meaning of what it is to have experience. But for that reason, it's not like a factual necessity, because it's not a fact that you might or might not encounter. On the contrary, to invoke again the kind of language Kant uses, it's the condition for the possibility of you experiencing any facts. So the kind of necessity it has, in as much as it is structural and definitive of experience, makes it in principle different from the kind of necessity of something that that you would factually find out to be the case about the world. So he says, since factual necessity presupposes them. And he says, even if my window imposes, as this one does here for me, imposes on me a certain perspective on the church, my body must first impose on me a perspective on the world. And the former necessity, the physical necessity that the window give me a particular perspective on the church, that can be a purely physical one only because the latter necessity that my body impose upon me a perspective on the world is metaphysical. So again, his distinction of physical and metaphysical there is again parallel to, analogous to Kant's distinction between the empirical and transcendental. So then, summing up that point that I've just been trying to make with him, factual situations can only affect me if I am first of such a nature that there can be factual situations for me. In other words, I observe external things with my body. I handle them, inspect them, and walk around them. But when it comes to my body, I never observe it itself. I would need a second body to be able to do so. And then it would itself be unobservable. So when I say that I always perceive my body, these words must not be understood in a merely statistical sense, right? Always doesn't mean, oh, each and every time it happens to be the case, right? And there must be something in the presentation of one's own body that renders its absence or even its variation inconceivable. I think that's all I want to read from there. I'd like to keep reading up on pages 94 and 95, but that's enough. I really wanted just to bring that out because I wanted very specifically to get you to start thinking about that connection I've just made between the kind of distinction Kant made between the empirical and the transcendental. I wanted you to see that that distinction is alive in your perceptual experience in the difference between what it is to be experiencing the invariable presence of your own body as the definition of your perspective, that which imposes upon you a perspective on the world, the difference between that and anything you encounter within that perspective, anything you find. Let me pause there for a second, and then we're going to go back and start the body as object chapters. So basically, he's just been showing you there why you shouldn't think of your body as an object in the normal sense. Now we're going to go back and look at the taking up of the body as object, but specifically we're just going to look at this analysis of the phantom limb. And so we're going to look briefly at his description of the experience of the phantom limb on pages 78 and 79, just to get the phenomenon or the fact. But then we're really just going to focus on his analysis of it from pages 80 to 82. That's our next task, and then we'll build on things from there. Okay, so let's turn now to Merleau-Ponty's actual description and study of the experience of the phantom limb. So he gives his basic description of the experience on 78 and 79, and then the essential analysis of it is pages 80 to 82. So that's what we're going to talk about. So what is the phantom limb? Well, it's a fairly common reality that people who have limbs amputated continue to feel things in that limb, even though it no longer exists, which in a certain sense is an impossibility. How can you feel something in something that isn't there? But if those people are going to describe their experience, that's what they're going to say. So it was discovered, well, who knows how long ago it was discovered. It was noted prominently about 500 years ago, 400 years ago, and is especially prominent in soldiers in the battlefield, and it's like a ghost of the leg is there haunting you, right? So hence the expression phantom limb. Anyway, it's a familiar reality. One of the many kinds of experience you would discover if you looked at the documentation of the different types of human experience. One of the many kinds of experiences that you would discover that seems impossible. It seems extraordinary. Well, it's definitely extraordinary. Seems impossible. Seems impossible given the way we commonly think about our bodies and our experience. what that should show you right off the bat is that the way you commonly think about your bodies and your experience isn't right. Obviously, there could be other kinds of explanations for it. There are lots of, weird circumstances and so on. So it's simply discovering that things don't immediately fit with your familiar view doesn't automatically prove your familiar view is wrong, but it should give you pause. And if you looked at so many phenomena, you would see things that should make you think, oh, maybe the way we think about things isn't quite right. Well, anyway, that's what he's going to talk about here. So he says people have this experience of phantom limb, and he's then going to talk about what it takes to make it start and what it takes to make it stop. And there's a problem there. So this is at the top of 79. So he says, the phenomenon in fact depends upon psychical determinants, and he has psychical in quotation marks. So what we would normally call psychical determinants or psychological determinants. What does he mean by that? Well, a phantom limb appears for a subject who was not previously experiencing one when an emotion or a situation evokes those of the injury. So there's a psychical determinant in the sense that the experience begins for psychological reasons. A person is reminded of something for one reason or another, is reminded of the circumstance in which the injury, the loss of the leg or whatever, was incurred, and that's when they feel it. And so the phenomenon, in fact, depends upon psychical determinants. A phantom limb appears for a subject who was not previously experiencing one when an emotion or a situation evokes those of the injury. A little bit more. Carries on. Anyway. But then he says at the bottom of that paragraph, so you would think, oh, there must be a psychological explanation for it. But he says, yet no psychological explanation can ignore the fact that the phantom limb disappears when the sensory conductors that run to the brain are severed. When I don't know what it is people do, they cauterize the nerves or whatever. But so the point is, the thing is turned on by a psychological stimulation, but it can be turned off by a physiological change. So this experience, from the point of view of its initiation, seems to be a psychological one. From the point of view of its termination, seems to be a physiological one. Why do we stress those things? Well, because those are both causal things. Something causes it to begin, something causes it to end. So this is an experience that manifestly is subject to psychological causation because it's brought into being by your feelings, right? But it's also subject to physiological or physical causation because you can stop it by cutting the nerves. So you have a phenomenon that exists in the world of psychological causality and exists in the world of physical causality, right? That's what the evidence of actual experience tells you. But the problem is that's incoherent. Nothing can fit that description. If the very way we define the physical is that which is subject to physical laws, and if you're subject to physical laws, you're only subject to physical laws, right? If you are subject to physical laws, then the reason the thing you're doing starts is a physical reason. Let's say physiological, because physical, which just means natural, can have more complicated meanings to it. But let's just say physiological. If mass is attracted to other mass, and so you got a big thing like the Earth, and smaller things come towards it, and so we have a formula that tells you how that works, right? The force is the gravitational constant times the product of the masses divided by the square of the distance or something like that between them. Is that right? G times m1 m2 over d squared, I think, is the formula for gravitational force. But that means that, when you throw a penny off the top of a building, that's going to explain basically how it falls. And there are a few other minor things, like the shape of the penny and its thickness is going to affect how it deals with air resistance and so on, which is why a piece of paper is going to fall more slowly than a round, dense rock. But it's not. But the rock doesn't fall faster because it's heavier, right? They both fall from the point of view of their mass. They both fall the same way. It's just that you can design a piece of paper so that for other physical reasons, in interaction with the air currents, it's going to go more slowly, right? So in other words, when you drop a piece of paper or a rock or a cow or anything you want off a building, there are strictly physical reasons that will explain why it falls at the rate it does, accelerates at the rate it does, and why it hits with the force it does, right? And the fact that the cow didn't feel good about it doesn't matter. The fact that you really, really, really want that rock to fall down fast doesn't matter. The fact that if it's a person who's falling, the fact that that person suddenly remembered a time when they dreamed of falling, that doesn't have anything to do with why they're falling either, right? So the point is, those are physical phenomena. They're explained by strictly physical laws, and emotional states have nothing to do with it, right? On the other hand, when you're thinking about, let's stick with logic. Let's stick with reasoning. Pretty strict rules there, right? When you're thinking about whether, let's say, you want a drink. Oh no, that's not a good example. What's a piece of logic? I don't know. If it's Tuesday, I like to have coffee. I don't know. Every Tuesday, I feel like having coffee. These aren't good examples, actually, because they're not actually necessities in the same way. I guess if I feel like having coffee, I feel like having coffee. If you add a 10-pound weight on my back, that might make me grumpy. And because I'm grumpy, I might not feel like getting out of my chair, and I might not want to go get that cup of coffee. But plus 10 pounds has no place in and of itself in the story of my psychological experience. So if I want coffee, I'm going to go get coffee. And if you put 10 pounds on my back, that doesn't have anything to do with that structure that I'm going to get coffee because I want it, or I'm not getting it because I don't want it. It may be the case that putting 10 pounds on my back results in my not getting coffee, but that's not because the structure of desire is inherently shaped by relations of mass. It's because I happen to not feel like doing it when I have a load on my back, right? My desire will change because of my other desires. I didn't come up with the greatest example there, but the point is, the whole idea of the psychological is that it's a closed domain. The whole idea of the physical is that it's a closed domain, and that's what you're looking for. And there are radically different kinds of causalities. I mean, that's really the point Kant was making a long time ago with the third antinomy, right? That we have a radically different way of understanding things that function in the domain of freedom, which is the domain of psychology, the domain of subjective experience and will and perspective, and the ability of people to be self-motivating initiators of things, people who are characterized by desire. That's a totally different logic than the logic of natural causality, right? So the whole point of the third antinomy was that those two things, they're totally different ways of thinking about reality, and Kant had a particular way of dealing with that, as you may recall. But the point is, they're radically different kinds of causality. So you can't just put them together and say it's sometimes this and it's sometimes that. If you can interrupt physical causality by the way you feel, then there's no physical causality, right? So the problem with the phantom limb is that when we ask, is it a physiological or a psychological phenomenon, and we ask those kinds of questions all the time, we ask that question from the philosophical dualism we almost all of us operate with almost all the time when we're thinking about things, right? We operate with a automatic sense of the radical difference between what happens in the mind and what happens in the body. And in a way, we're right to do that because the very meanings of those two things are different, as I was just saying, with respect to the third antinomy and so on. But the problem is, as I'm sure anybody who's ever studied a couple of philosophy classes knows, that it's incoherent to hold those views. So we all live as dualists, believing in the radical difference of our free mind and our causally determined body. That view is incoherent, but it's the view we live with. And we ask the question of the phantom limb from that point of view. We say, okay, well, which one is it? Is it psychological or physiological? And the phantom limb will not accept to fit into either of those categories. It looks psychological, except that you stop it by cutting the nerves. Therefore, it looks physiological, except that you start it by feeling bad. So the very phenomenon of the phantom limb testifies to the unsatisfactory of a dualistic view of mind and body for understanding at least that experience. In fact, that's going to be true of all experience. And the phantom limb turns out to, through his analysis, reveals it to just have the structure that is true of all of our experience, really. And so we're talking about the phantom limb not because we particularly happen to be interested in that, though you might be, but because it provides an excellent lens for thinking about what's going on in our experience all the time. So I'm not going to pursue further those issues of dualism. I mean, they're such a familiar part of every first and second year philosophy class that I imagine it's pretty straightforward to articulate the problems of that kind of dualism. And it should be the case that you realize you always think that way. Maybe your philosophy teacher didn't draw your attention to that, but we think that way all the time. Right? We are living dualists all the time. And that means the way we think about all kinds of things in the world just doesn't make sense. But here we see that on display. And then the relevant thing to notice about the phantom limb is that if you approach it with those categories, which we generally do, and he's documenting in this book that, all the official scientists studying these things do that too. If we approach it with those categories, we're always going to misinterpret it. He talks a little bit about the problem of that dualism there on the bottom of 79 and the top of 80. And then on 80, he begins the new section, which is about the notion of existence. So, Merleau-Ponty is basically an existentialist. I mean, phenomenology and existentialism are basically the same thing. And so here he's going to give you the notion of existence as the new category we have to work with. And he says this is existence between the psychical and the physiological. Right, so we're gonna offer the category of existence as an alternative to the dualism of mind and body. So he says, so in order to describe the belief in the phantom limb and the refusal of the mutilation, these authors speak of a repression, of an organic suppression. These authors are, I think, Schilder and Lermite. I can't remember, they're in the footnotes. But it basically is saying when people talk about this, they basically have to say, well, it's like a psychological thing, but it's like a psychological thing embedded in physiology, right? So it's like the phantom limb is like a structure of repression in that it's like a psychological attitude of denial. You're denying that you lost your leg, and so you're trying to pretend it hasn't happened yet. But it's like something that you don't realize you're doing that. You didn't think you were doing that. If someone says, "Did you lose your leg?" You say, "Yeah, of course I know I lost my leg." So it doesn't seem like you're repressing the knowledge, and that it seems to be something that is driving or is alive in your very body, right? So that's why he says the authors who analyze it have to feel like they have to say something like an organic suppression. The psychological structure of repression, but happening in your body. And Merleau-Ponty says terms like this, which are hardly Cartesian, right? Those are terms which violate the very dualism that is typically and misleadingly attributed to Descartes. These terms, which are hardly Cartesian, force us to form the idea of an organic thought by which the relation between the psychical and the physiological could become conceivable. So Merleau-Ponty just gives you a new term like that. Instead of saying organic repression, he says organic thought. But but the thing he's trying to get at there is, here's your two categories: organism, body, and thought. And he's saying you need a notion of an organic thought. We need to have a notion of a kind of intelligence that is inherently bodily, and we need to have a notion of a body that is inherently intelligent. So what we need is not the dualizing of intelligence and materiality. We need to grasp bodies as the living realization of something like thinking. And that's what then he's about to say. And he says, initially that might sound like a funny or a weird mystical idea, but it's actually completely straightforward. He says it's basically the idea of a life form. So he says, we've already encountered this elsewhere in the case of substitutions. He's referring back to his earlier book, The Structure of Behavior. So he says we've encountered it earlier, but you haven't if you read this book, so it's quite new here. Anyway, so he says, well, I'll read that actual sentence. He says, we've already encountered the elsewhere in the case of substitutions, phenomena that exceed the alternative between the psychical and the physiological, between explicit finality and mechanism. Well, I think I'll return to those terms in a moment. But so then he gives an example of it. He says, so I referred to a life form, and that's roughly what he's going to do now. He says, when an insect instinctively substitutes a healthy leg for a leg that has been removed, it's not, as we have seen, that a pre-established safety mechanism is automatically triggered and substituted for the circuit that has just been put out of service. But no more is it because the animal is conscious of a goal to attain and uses its limbs as different means, for then the substitution would have to be produced each time that the action is blocked, and we know that it does not occur if the leg is merely tied. The animal simply continues to exist in the same world and carries itself toward the world with all of its powers. The tied limb is not replaced by the free one because the tied one continues to count in the animal's being, and because the impulse of activity that goes toward the world still passes through the limb. So the point there is, an insect, let me say something he sort of says at the end, but let me say it at the beginning. The insect is essentially a kind of life form. It's got a thing it does. It's life form. There's a form of activity that animal, that organism, carries out, but it's in a significant way goal directed, and in two senses. One, just in saying that there's a characteristic form that the animal carries out, that means all of the animal's actions are going to tend towards the realization of that characteristic form. But it also means in a more specific way that the animal is pursuing goals, like getting food, like moving from this place to that place or whatever. So there's a kind of purpose or goal directedness to the reality of being an insect. So what it is to be an insect this kind of insect in a fundamental way is to pursue a certain kind of goal. But first, well, there are a few points to make. First, that's not a goal that's explicitly posited in a self-conscious mind, the way it is for you when you say, what am I going to do tomorrow? Oh, I think I'm going to go play Dungeons and Dragons. That'll be great. That's you planning your excellent future, but that's not what the insect does. The insect doesn't do any planning, does it? Presumably, there's no evidence that the insect does any self-conscious cognizing. We looked at explicitly self-conscious beings in Hegel's study, and we saw all the things that are involved there. It doesn't seem like insects are wrapped up in that story. But insect life also isn't automatic. They're not wind-up toys. And the important evidence for that, we're not even getting to the thing he says here, but the point is going to be the same. But we're not getting to the thing he said here yet. But the thing about insects is that their behavior discriminates, right? They can be confronted with situations that are not pre-mapped out, and they'll have to deal with it. Here, so the thing that's important about this example Merleau-Ponty's giving you is it's a pretty striking example of exactly that. If the insect loses one of its legs, then the functions that leg would usually carry out are somehow going to have to be handled by the other legs. So that it could be that it has to do with something it touches that may be relevant to collecting pollen. I don't know. It may have to do with balance. I don't know the particular case here and exactly what the functions of those legs are. But the believing his account to be true, the investigators he's talking about say that when the insect loses a leg, the other legs step up in their own way to carry out that task. So the tasks that used to be distributed over 8 legs are now distributed over 7. Right? But he says that's not automatic, and it's not just because that thing doesn't do it. And he says what happens is if you tie one of those legs so that it doesn't work, then the insect, I guess, does the equivalent of stumbling, or whatever it is that leg tries to do. It keeps trying to do it and fails because it's been tied up. So the interesting thing there is that it's not a matter of the insect as an agent consciously noticing that it's not able to do something and choosing now to use its other legs for something. It's rather because if that were the case, it would do it when its leg is tied up too. But there's no explicit cognitive noticing there, right? But what happens is when that leg is meaningfully severed in a bodily way, such that, as he says, it no longer counts in the circuit of that animal's living system, that's when the body carries out its tasks by different means. Right? There was a great example about sensation back in chapter 1 of the introduction. I'm not going to go through and study it, but I'll send you to it, because if you're actually studying the book, you really should read it. Yeah, it's great. It's on page 9, and he's basically saying that, people talk as if sensation is just a simple matter of stimulus and response. He's saying no, it's far more complicated and interesting than that. And basically he says sensation is more like a norm, more like a goal. And what you see is that the sensing organism in interaction with the environment actually basically strives to realize a consistent norm of sensation. And so you can damage various things in your body. And you as a sensing organism are in a spot where you can't sense the way you used to. But he says, the damage doesn't just make it impossible for you to sense, it makes it harder. And what your body will do, like the insect, is draw on different kinds of resources to try to get the same result it was supposed to get in the first place. So he says on page 9, at the elementary level of sensibility, we catch sight of a collaboration among partial stimuli on the one hand. So first of all, it's going to be a collaboration between stimuli, things coming from the outside world, the information, and the organism. And then within the organism, there's going to be a kind of a collaboration too. So we see a collaboration among partial stimuli and between the sensorial system and the motor system that, through a variable physiological constellation, keeps the sensation constant. So basically he says something like, I can't remember the exact example there, but it's something like if you can't feel something, if you apply enough pressure or if you move around or something, you'll be able to feel it, right? So movement is what allows an insufficient sensory stimulus to suddenly become sufficient. So the motor and the sensory functions have to work together to rely on partial stimuli to produce a living experience of what it would be like just to have normal sensation. So like I said, I'm not going to analyze that in full. You should go back and read it. But the point there is that your body isn't just working at this stimulus and response level. It's an intelligent thing carrying out norm-governed activities. There's a kind of trying involved. Body is aiming for a certain sort of goal. And when the perfect resources aren't there, it becomes it becomes a bricoleur, right? It becomes a handyman. It becomes somebody who's able just to use whatever happens to be around to do a version of that thing. And you wanted to have perfect wood and a perfect hammer, but you're going to have to use some wood and some cardboard, and you're going to have to use a rock and some other kind of spike to make this thing, and some twine. So the point is, the body, you're not thinking, the insect isn't thinking at all, but the body, faced with a certain kind of damage, reconfigures itself to bring about the result it was supposed to bring about. Right? So there, in other words, there's a kind of intelligence and norm governedness, or what he calls a kind of finality, an orientation towards a final cause. There's a kind of directedness towards a goal that is the very meaning of what it is to be that living body. Right? So he says, in this situation, there's no more choice here than there is choice in a drop of oil that, so to speak, employs all its internal forces in order to solve the problem of maximum and minimum that's set for it. Like, you will see similar issues of address at much more primitive level of addressing situations at a mechanical and chemical level that you're here seeing at a biological level. And there's surely no thought going, so no process of self-conscious thinking going on there. So there's no more choice here than in the case of a drop of oil doing something. But the only difference is that the drop of oil adapts itself to given external forces, while the animal itself projects the norms of its milieu and establishes the terms of its vital problems. So it's a question, he says, of the a priori of the species, not a personal choice. Right? So the very thing it is to be an insect, that kind of insect, is to be oriented to trying to do this thing. And that's, more or less, that's what we call instinct, right? Different species are operate on the basis of instincts, which are a kind of intelligence and a kind of discrimination. They recognize relevant features of an environment with respect to a particular problem or set of problems or goals, and generate the appropriate activities to respond to that. Right? So in that sense, animals are responsive, not reactive, but they don't respond out of the kind of lifestyle choices that young North American adults develop. They respond out of the established norms that define what it is to be that kind of animal. Like I said, that's roughly what we mean by instinct. So he says, thus, behind the phenomenon of substitution, we discover the movement of being in and toward the world. Right? So in other words, an animal isn't just, responding arbitrarily to stimuli or whatever. An animal basically encounters what's outside it as an environment, as a kind of world. He's actually going to, like Heidegger, is going to reserve the term world for the somewhat richer thing of beings with explicit self-conscious choice, people, basically. So that's who's going to get the term Welt. So here we're going to talk about an Umwelt, an environment. Which is the thing that corresponds then to that a priori of the species that he referred to, which corresponds roughly to instinct. An animal has a meaningful environment. I can't remember. I know when I was talking about Kant, I referred to Heidegger's excellent lecture course on the fundamental concepts of metaphysics, where he draws on von Uexküll and talks about environment and Umwelt and Welt. I can't remember if I said this exact thing though, but the point is, an animal like I think I was if I was talking about it, I might have talked about a thrush, because I like that example. A thrush has to break whatever, the shell of a snail or something on a rock, what you would call a rock and what I would call a snail. And the thrush doesn't call it any of that. But so for the thrush, those are the relevant terms of its environment. For you, the relevant terms of your environment are the edge of your property and the sidewalk, the public sidewalk, and then the public road and your neighbor's property, for example. You don't, rock and snail are not salient to you. Property lines are not salient to the thrush. The issues that define the very meaning of that environment don't translate into one another, for the terms from the thrush's world and the terms from your world. The snail's got a different world, different Umwelt, a different environment than the thrush. From the point of view of someone who takes an objective photograph from outside, you can say, here are the features. There's some rocks, there's some grass, there's some dirt, right? Those material pieces are exactly the same for me, for the thrush, and for the snail. But none of us responds to neutral material pieces. We respond to meaningful environments. And the terms of those meaningful environments aren't automatically translatable one into the other. The very way the set of things is sort of partitioned, what the pieces aren't the same between those worlds. So when he says the behind the phenomenon of substitution, we discover the movement of being in and toward a world. Well, the point is every type of animal is moving towards a world, or towards an environment, towards an Umwelt, which is to say the way it's already been decided what the basic meaningfulness of external reality is going to be for it. Jumping back to Kant, for us, the meaning of external reality is nature, with all the meanings that are attached to that, and all the way that's related to objectivity, rationality, the ability to grapple with the unconditioned, and all the other things I talked about some weeks ago. The thrush isn't doing that. So the thrush doesn't relate to nature in the objective sense that we have of that, even though we would say the thrush is part of nature as we understand it. But those aren't the terms under which the thrush operates. So the thrush's Umwelt is not nature. It's whatever thrush world is, thrush environment is, right? And so the point is, it's in the very nature of a life form to project a kind of world. And the things that occur outside and all of its sensory stimulation will be filtered into that, right? It will be interpreted in light of that thing, and the evidence sensation is like the relevant evidence for noticing this or that aspect of the already given parameters of the relevant world. So he goes on to say that, he says, when we say that an animal exists, that it has a world, or that it belongs to a world, we do not mean that it has a perception or an objective consciousness of the world. And he's repeatedly using the word world here. I mean, I didn't check the French, but if he's using the word Welt here, he will otherwise use Umwelt for that. So in the language I was just using, we would be more inclined to say environment, but the point is the same. When we say that when an animal exists, that it has a world, or that it belongs to a world, we do not mean that it has a perception or an objective consciousness of the world. Right? He's saying, but it's not an objective consciousness of it. It's that it has a lived relationship to a meaningful situation. And the situation that triggers instinctive operations is not wholly articulated and determinate. Its total sense is not possessed, right? That's the way in which it's not an objective consciousness of it. It's a kind of ready familiarity, a ready set of expectations, a rough and ready set of expectations for what kinds of things are possible. And so he says, the situation provides only a practical signification. I guess that means as opposed to a full theoretical meaning, because they're not theoretical animals, beings particularly. The situation provides only a practical signification, and the recognition that it induces is merely a bodily recognition. So we're saying, what's going on with the insect in its substitution problem, or any animal living out of its life form? The significance of world isn't that it has an idea. It's not a theoretical objective consciousness. It's that things in its environment trigger or call forth certain kinds of behavior. So that's the way in which you could say it's a practical significance. And he says, It induces merely a bodily recognition, right? It's not something going through the filter of explicit self-conscious thought. It's that the world has a kind of behavioral meaning that that according to what happens triggers in the body responsive behavior, right? So it's a bodily recognition of a practical significance. So that's what he means by an organic thought, right? That's what he's saying. That's what we have to recognize. The body is intelligent. It's not like a mind in the way we often think of that as this explicitly self-conscious reflecting thing. It's also not something that might or might happen in the body. The very being of that body, the very way that body lives, is as a process, not just of digesting its food and so on, but as a process of meaningfully responding to the environmental triggers. Right? So the body is an embodiment of a kind of intelligence. It's a living carrying out of a project. So you can't adequately describe or conceptualize a living body without notions of project, goal, intention. Right? It's not a mechanical thing. Right? So living bodies can only be understood through the logic of intelligence. And so in that sense, the body is like a little living thought. It's a living project. And he says, so that's finally going to bring us back around to talking about our own experience. So he says, what we're seeing is really the basic thing that Heidegger called being in the world. I'm going to give a few lectures on being in time. So when I do that, I'll put a link in here to them in case you want to see me talking directly about Heidegger's notion of being in the world and being in time. I haven't got that yet. But basically, you're set up for it now, right? Being in the world means the thing we just said, except not at the level of what's going on in a instinctively driven animal life form, but in the level of the kinds of beings that we are, which are where we are, as we said when we talked about Kant, all the things I just said, but also beings who are intrinsically and self-consciously and explicitly oriented towards questions of the unconditioned, right? That's really what it's going to mean to be a kind of being who has a world. It's our environment is like the things we just said here, except that the meanings of that environment, unlike, what we would call a rock and a snail, as thing to smash supper on, for the thrush, the meanings through which our world are articulated have to do with some other things, so the distinctively human things. Heidegger talks about that quite a bit in Being in Time. I won't go through a lot of that now, but I'll just say you can sort of imagine what that might mean, and some of it's going to come up soon enough. And so he says the phenomenon of the phantom limb is illuminated through Heidegger's notion of being in the world. Right? What the phantom limb really shows us is that we have to think of ourselves like we think of that insect doing substitution. Now, what did we learn from that insect doing substitution? We learned that its life form is bodily recognition of a practical significance that operates, so to speak, below the level of explicit self-conscious reflection. And that's what we're going to see here. Basically, he's going to say, and this is going to be then the next section, he's going to say that what you see in the phantom limb is that even though at an explicitly reflective, self-conscious level, you lost your leg, it's been amputated, your body is like a cat, it's like a thrush. Your body, that living intelligence, is living out of a different relationship to the world than your explicit conscious thinking is. So your body is still living in a world where stairs summon your legs up to walk on them. Doorknobs summon, or handrails, summon your hands out to grab them. Friends coming down the street, summon up your hand to reach up and wave, right? Those things I just described, walking on the stairs, grabbing the doorknob or the handrail or waving, those are all bodily recognitions of a practical signification. So the point is, you live out of a being in the world, to use that expression in the sense that he was just giving it through talking about the insects and the a priori of the species and so on. You live out of a kind of being in the world that was defined before you lost that limb. And though you know cognitively that you lost that limb, you are living your body, not you as a psychological being, but your body as what he called an organic thought. That's the thing that hasn't recognized that. So let me pause there for a moment, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about this important distinction he makes now between what in Colin Smith's older translation was the habit body and the body at this moment. But yeah, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Yeah, okay. Well, let's wrap this sucker up. So we were talking about the phantom limb, and I was saying that what Merleau-Ponty is trying to show is that we could almost say you're of two minds. You are on the one hand, there is your explicit ego, your self-conscious positing mind that says, I'm Bill and I'm a mechanic and I'm going out for lunch right now or whatever. But then there is that organic mind, organic thought that says, here's the kind of being I am and here's the kind of world I live in. I call them minds, which is fine. But in a way, what Merleau-Ponty is really trying to get away from is thinking of them on the model that we commonly think about minds. So he's trying to say, look, we're actually talking about a body here. So really, we're saying that you have two different levels at which you engage meaningfully with the world. You have one level which is the one he's talking about here, in many ways the most important one, which is the basic stabilizing of the fact of the world that you live in, right? The basic stabilizing of a fixed and regular world that is the meaningful context of all the things you do. And within that thing being fixed, you have the room to think about, here's what I want to do today, blah, 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 blah. So any of us, we all think of that explicit thinking about what I want to do today. We think of that as where we are really doing something. That's where I'm really thinking. That's where my subjectivity is. And that stable world, precisely because it's stable, doesn't seem like something we're doing at all. It seems like just a matter of fact. But the fact is that stable world is an act of interpretation, an act of thinking. It's an ongoing practical and behavioral act of interpreting in external stimuli in such a way as to render a constant experience of ongoing meaningful world. So that's what you're doing, but not the you who is explicitly thinking about things right now. It's the you that's buried in you, and it's the you that is the history of choices you made, and as we'll see in a minute, the history of habits you developed, where that history, that subjectivity, is lived by you at the level of your bodily engagement with an environment. Doesn't pass through the level of your explicit consciousness anymore. So So, so we're going to talk now. Well, actually, let me put that slightly more in terms of the body. And so the explicit you who reflects on things today about whether you're going to go to the store or not, that one says, I'm sitting here in this chair, I'm 6 feet tall, I ride a bicycle, and I am going to walk down those stairs over there and get on my bicycle and ride up that street to that store, and with these hands I'm going to pick up the groceries, whatever it is you're going to do, right? Whenever you think about the things you're going to do, they're going to be bodily things, right? The you who's going to act in the world is always going to be articulated in terms of the body. So anything you're thinking about you is going to have a translation into this thing that takes up a certain amount of space here, So when I said you're of two minds, then I guess I could have, as he does, basically say you're of two bodies. On the one hand, there is what he calls the actual body, which is that thing I was just talking about, the thing that's going to get on the bicycle and ride over and get the milk, that personal thing where you carry out your individual actions that you're thinking about and so on. But you have another body, and that's the habitual body. That's the body that's the deep meaning of your body that is carrying out that core bodily recognition of practical significance that establishes for you a comfortable existence in a continuingly self-same world. That's what he says on 84, about 10 lines up from the bottom. In the case we are considering, the ambiguity of knowledge amounts to this. It is as though our body comprises two distinct layers, that of the habitual body and that of the actual body. ... It's a matter of knowing how the habitual body can act as a guarantee for the actual body. So it's the thing he says there that I'm largely drawing on, but obviously it's the topic of the whole chapter. So I actually want to go back to the page before that, to 83. And he says, imagine someone, he says a phantom limb person, and I imagine he's right, although he's been talking about the he's been sort of paralleling the cases of phantom limb and anosognosia, which I think is roughly what people would refer to as spatial neglect or neglect now. But anyway, it's the anosognosia is living in denial of a malady. So here he gives an example of somebody doing something, a phantom limb person doing something, and like I said, I assume he's right, but I haven't studied this, so I might have thought that he was talking about a case of anosognosia, but in any case, he says, in the case of the phantom limb, the subject seems to be unaware of the mutilation and counts on his phantom as if it were a real limb, since he tries to walk with his phantom limb and is not even discouraged by a fall. And that really sounds like anosognosia to me, but I could easily be wrong. The relevant thing is just that kind of thing happens to whoever it is we're talking about. Anyway, here's the point. Well, then it seems like a phantom limb case, actually, because he says, in other respects, he describes the particulars of the phantom limb quite well, such as its strange motricity. Well, that sounds like the phantom limb. Anyway, but here's the relevant point. If he treats it in practice as a real limb, this is because, like the normal subject, he has no need of a clear and articulated perception of his body in order to begin moving. It is enough that the body is available as an indivisible power, and in this case that the phantom limb is sensed as vaguely implicated in it. So the point is you go back to the insect who has to move somewhere. Like the insect's body is an indivisible power. It doesn't have 8 specific things it does, and now it's lost one because it's lost a leg, so it can only do 7, right? It has the things it does as its life functions, and those things draw on the ready resources of all of its bodily articulations insofar as they're available. And the phenomenon he's talking about is that insects who lose a leg will distribute those tasks over the 7 remaining ones, right? So the insect, in other words, there is drawing on its body as an indivisible power. Its body wasn't divided up into 8 powers and it lost one. its body is the power to carry out its tasks, and the body continues to be that after it's lost a leg. If I don't know, if you're carrying things and somebody gives you something else and you kind of shove it under your arm, you're doing the same thing. You're treating your body as a kind of indivisible power to carry. And though normally you would stick things in your hand, when your hands are full, you find another way. And you don't sit there and ponder and think, how am I going to solve this problem? Is there something on my body I could use to do this? You just do it automatically, or if your hands are full and you have to open something, like you might bite it and pull it. I don't know, but you don't. I'm thinking of just situations where you automatically turn to some part of your body to do something, but that part is not the one you might usually use for like a grasping thing or something like that. Or if you have to wipe your face, like on a hot day like this, if I'm sweaty and my hands are full, I might, wipe my face like that or something like that. Maybe I don't even know what. In all of those cases, you non-reflectively, you live your body as a whole bunch as a massive resource for doing things, and things will be substituted for the normal functioning parts if need be. So that's why, like a normal subject, he has no need of a clear and articulated perception of his body in order to begin moving it. You don't move or grab or wipe your face by stepping back, surveying your body like a anatomist and saying, I imagine I could accomplish that task by doing this or that thing. You don't have a clear and articulated perception of your body. You actually probably are often thinking about other things, and you just go on and do stuff, and your body is just kind of the guarantee that those resources are going to be available to you and are going to get that stuff done. And so it makes sense then that and that's why you can do something quite a bit like the phantom limb yourself. You can be carrying something in your hand, and suddenly a situation requires you to grab something, and maybe you will go to grab it and drop that thing, even though you didn't want to drop that thing, and maybe you didn't even want to grab. The thing coming at you will elicit from you the response, I better grab, and effectively you've lost that hand. Effectively, that hand has already been accounted for to do something else. But you live as if that hand were your grabbing power, right? And that's not so different from the phantom limb. It's just in this case you do still have the hand. But you can, in other words, have something that cognitively should not be available, and yet your body lives with it being available in any case, right? Or that could tie your shoelaces together and try to stand still, and then have someone throw your son over the balcony or something. Like, you're going to run to try to get it, and you're going to fall flat on your face, even though your shoes are tied together. When you see, that was a nasty example, I realize, but when you see an awful thing happening, you're not going to think, how do I move and how do I get there? You're just going to will to move, and your body already knows how it's going to do that, and it's going to set that in motion. But even though your shoes are tied together, your basic orientation as a moving subject is going to summon up those feet to move at a level sort of below and more primary than your reflective knowledge that your feet are tied together. And you're going to start going, and as you're going, you're going to think, shit, my feet are tied, and you're going to fall flat on your face. Right? You can think of other examples, like, but it seems to me those things actually happen to us every day, where your actual body is out of commission, but your habitual body is committed to acting, and you will mess up a situation because you will live out of your habit body, which contradicts what you meant to do with your actual body. So that's the distinction. I want to say two more things now, one about the body and one about the habit. So first of all, about the body. So he said, he doesn't have to have a clear and articulated perception of his body in order to begin moving it. It is enough that his body is available as an indivisible power. Right? Basically, your body is your power to engage with the world. That is how you live your body. Like, so we were trying to do the phenomenology of the body. We're treating the body as a kind of experience. What is it to experience your body? Experience yourself as a body. Well, to experience yourself as a body is to experience yourself as able to walk, if that's the kind of body you have. Not everybody has that, but able to walk, or able to catch, or able to turn and look, able to listen, able to greet, right? You don't have your body as you experience it is not that body on the operating table that I began with that I began with. Your body as you experience it is the power to greet, the ability to walk, the capacity to turn and run, right? And so let me skip ahead just to a little passage from the chapter on space. Merleau-Ponty draws on a notion from Husserl here that phenomenologically speaking, your body, he says, is the I can. Your body is the experience of I can. He says, indeed, consciousness as such is not, this is on page 139, the beginning of the section K that starts on that page about 15 lines up from the bottom or something. Consciousness is originarily not an I think that, but rather an I can. Right? So first he's saying there, the root of experience is behavior and interaction with the world, not positing reflective thoughts. So in that sense, you're the core of what it is to be an experiencing being is I can, right? But what is that I can? Well, that is your body, right? That is your availability of action. That's your the lived sense of the body. So that's the first of the 2 points I wanted to end with. I wanted to talk about the body, and I said I wanted to say something about body and something about habit. Well, the point about the body then is that it is at first the experience of the I can. That's its core meaning. But then a bit about the notion of habit. You become habituated to things, and that's quite liberating at the same time as it's binding. Because when you develop a habit, you do it habitually, so like you're bound to it. It's like turns out you're gonna fiddle with your glasses like this whether you want to or not. Habits are binding in a way. Like when you become habituated to something, it means that's the way you're going to act without even thinking about it. But then they're also liberating, because that's the way you're going to act without even thinking about it, right? It doesn't take effort. It doesn't take planning. It doesn't have to be a deliberate thing anymore to act that way. So I'm in the habit of always putting my keys in the same pocket, and the result of that is that my keys are always there and I never have to think about it, right? It has a bit of a downside too, because once every 2 years I'll be coming home, putting my key, and I'll use my keys to lock the door, and maybe my son will be crying upstairs, or the phone will be ringing, or whatever, and I'll suddenly have to just run in and I'll just put my keys down on a table instead of doing what I always otherwise do and put them in my pocket. And I won't notice that. And so the next time I go out to get the car, I'll reach in my pocket for my keys and they won't be there. Or I'll come to get back in the house and the door will be locked and I can't get in. Right? That's the phantom limb, right? It's actually the case that my keys weren't there, and I could have known that because I was there. I was the one who put them down on the table, so I should have known that. But I wasn't even thinking about it, and I live out of a world in which my keys are always available to me when I need them, and they're always in that place, right? So that's a good example of a habit and of a regular thing one person does that's like a phantom limb. I was living with the limb of my keys being there, even though actually they weren't. They were part of my habit body, but not part of my actual body. But the thing that's liberating there is that I never have to think about unlocking doors. My keys are always there. I know a few other people quite intimately who don't do that. I know one person she never knows where her keys are. Every time she comes in, she puts them somewhere. She can't find them. She gets locked out. It's a daily issue. And that's fine if you want to live that way, but that makes it seems a lot harder to me. It seems like every day you got to grapple with this troubling issue of locks and keys, and I never grapple with that issue. Other habits too, like I'm in the habit of speaking English, I developed that habit decades ago. My 4-year-old son is pretty into that now. When he was just born, he didn't speak English, and he probably was already starting to by a week, because those would be the sounds he heard. But still, doors were pretty open to him for probably a couple of years. But starting around the age 2, he started saying English sentences, and now, he gets around the world pretty powerfully as an English speaker. So, powerfully, that's a great habit to have developed. It's a great habit. He's having become habituated to saying door for that thing over there that I would open to get out of the room, and room for this thing I'm in, and whatever other and being for being, whatever English words are. Becoming habituated to saying them that way rather than another way, it means he has a language, and he has this extremely powerful way to interact with the world and with other people. But it's also one-sided. I mean, he can only speak English, and he's going to get hung up now when he runs up against other people who speak Czech or Marathi or whatever. He's bound to that one. I could go on. I will go on a little bit more, but I'm sure you get the point. But so the basic point is the real point I want to make is the liberating side of habits. So I've been trying to balance liberation and binding, but the real point I want to make about habits is that they're liberating. My son had to work at walking, but he's got it now. A long time ago. He had to work at articulating the basic sounds of letters, just vocalizing. But he's got that now. Developing those habits meant those things disappeared for him as issues, and they no longer required attention. So now for a year or two he's been writing, and so he couldn't really do an A for a long time, but now of course he can write words and so on. So initially you have to learn just how to hold the pen, and you make these weird things, you can't even make a proper shape, and then later, you're making pretty good shapes all the time, good enough that you can read, and then after that it just doesn't matter. You get better and better at it, but once you cross a threshold that you can read that writing, like you're playing a new game. And, so things like that, walking, talking, writing, those are really basic ones, and it's an incredible struggle to learn how to do them, but the point is, he and all of us, generally speaking, we got that. And it's because we got that we're able to do so much other stuff, right? So developing habits is a way of taking your self-consciousness, your explicit self-consciousness, out of your actions so that you can put it onto more important things, and you then live with a kind of a guarantee of a relationship to the world at that developed level of whatever that habit is. And that's a process we go through repeatedly. We habituate ourselves to something, so we develop a level of interacting with the world, and then we basically remove our explicit self-consciousness from that, let it do its own thing, and we work on something else. And probably there we develop a new habit, and then let it do its own thing and move on to something else, for years and years and years. That's the process. And let me just add one more thing. When you leave those processes to do their own thing, they're also not mechanical routines. Like that was sort of the point about the insect or whatever. Like they're intelligent things. So you've built intelligence into your way of behaving that now functions at an habitual level, but it's intelligence. So your habits will change over time. Like on the one hand, the habit itself, even in its most static form, is a discriminating thing. Walking discriminates about the surface of the road, the air pressure, whatever else. So while you're walking, even if it's happening habitually, there's a lot of intelligent discrimination happening in that walking. So walking is an intelligent activity. It's not mechanical. But also those habits continue to change. I was going to say grow, but grow, unless you're going to apply the word grow to cancer, which I don't think you unambiguously would. I guess it's better to say change, because grow involves essentially progress towards a norm. So habits change. I guess they don't always go. Often they grow. They don't always. They can get funny too. But habits will. My main point is that they're still dynamic and changing. And so even though there are things that you've left to habit, you can still get much better at them, even though you don't spend time reflecting on them, because the habit itself is dynamic and sort of self-educating and self-improving, maybe sometimes self-worsening too. But that if you were going to get really involved in the study of habit, you could tell me the answers to that about how those things fit. But all I'm saying is that it's pretty familiar from experience that habits improve themselves. Yeah, so I was saying, we do this thing, right? But so that's a continual process of us taking ourselves out of that. But so what's happening? Well, we're noticing then that kind of bodily intelligence that keeps getting richer and richer with each level of habit, right? I am becoming someone who can do all kinds of things that I don't think about, and at a certain level that I no longer understand. Actually, speaking of self-improving habits, like think about throwing a football, which I'm no good at, but I probably do some physical thing that I'm good at. But I imagine throwing a football, like, some people, of course, no doubt professional quarterbacks study it, and the coach says, well, you got to change the angle of the hand there or something. I don't know. It's like you certainly can break it down and study it. But not everybody's going to do that. But there are lots of people who are going to play their sports, and they're going to get better at those things they do, even though they don't reflect on them. But the continuing practice in intelligent situations means that habit's going to improve. And so you become a better quarterback or a better football thrower, even if you don't explicitly study it. Right? So that's what I'm getting at when I'm saying that's an intelligent action. But going back to that line he said before, when he was talking about substitution, he said he was talking about the situation provides only a practical signification, and the recognition that it induces is merely a bodily recognition. It's lived as an open situation and calls for the movements. That was on page 81. I mean, that's the thing I'm trying to get at, right? You're ongoingly involved in a lot of bodily recognitions. Extreme intelligence is displayed by you as you walk out the front door and go up the street. And one way to think of that is like watch a toddler trying to get up and down the stairs, and you can see all the troubles that have to be dealt with there. You deal with those. You deal with interpersonal situations. You deal with all kinds of things, right? To go back to the language he was using before, there is a whole holding together of a world when you walk down the street, right? You are orchestrating a massive thing, or you are orchestrating, is that right? There has been orchestrated for you in your life a massive thing, and you're holding it together. I'm not quite sure what the verb should be there, but you're holding a lot of shit together when you're walking around. Because there are things like gender norms, the way you walk down the street, and in all the things you're doing, you're carrying out a set of highly developed views, maybe we should call them prejudices, but whatever views you've come to live from about gender, about how many genders there are, about who belongs to which, and about what expectations belong to them. And those things, and you're making decisions about that in the way you dress. You're making decisions about that in the way you walk, the facial expressions you make, and the way you respond to all the people you see on the street. That's enough. You can fill in more. The point I wanted to make there is, along with the intelligence of navigating the physical issues of balancing on steps and so on, and the immediately interpersonal issues of navigating with particular people, right? You're carrying on cultural narratives, right, of all sorts in your immediate behavior. But that's not what's on your mind. You think, I'm going to go up to the store and buy a quart of milk on my bike because I'd like to go for a ride in the cool evening, right? Your mind at this moment and your body at this moment are not engaged with gender norms, physical problems of balance, issues of interpersonal recognition, and whatever other things that I was talking about. But those things are all being carried out through your ongoing actions, as we studied when we talked about Hegel, right? So maybe this is thing to say. I mean, this is part of the way I was conceiving the relationship of these things. We were talking about Hegel and the dialectic of recognition and all the things involved in that. Well, the point that I really wanted to make here is that those things are in the way you move your body around. Those are layers of meaning that are structuring your existence. They're how you exist, and they're how you have a world. And those are the meanings of your movements. And those are the movements of the habit body. Those are the movements of the body, you as a body, who became habituated to responsively engaging with those things in such a way as to hold together this coherent world. So those are the habits we're talking about. I think there's one other thing I wanted to say. Yeah, I mean, you could skip ahead. Again, this is from the next chapter, which we haven't talked about on its own terms yet, but it's just a few passages about habit at the end of the spatiality chapter that are good. But so now I'm looking at pages 144 and 145, and there he's talking about habits, and he says, well, so what I was saying here was, you carry a whole world with you in the way you walk down the street. And I was talking about how, when you develop a habit, you no longer have to think about those things. Well, so, you used to have to struggle with your shoes, but then you learned how to tie them and wear them. And so they're not an issue for you. And so when you walk down the street, your shoes aren't an object you struggle with. They're part of you, right? And your coat and your bag, and your handheld thing. When you first got that handheld thing, you thought, what's this? And you didn't know how to use it, and it might have been sort of awkward. And then you got used to it pretty quickly. You don't think about it anymore. Now, it becomes the way you communicate with people, roughly the same way your hand is the thing by which you grab something, right? Your so-called smartphone is essentially an organ of you by means of which you're able to carry on other things. So the point I want to make here, and he makes this point with the blind person's cane on 144, and he also made this point back at the beginning of the classical psychology chapter on one of those pages I read, 93. He says, on 93, he says, it shows that the actions in which I habitually engage incorporate their instruments and make them participate in the original structure of my own body. That's 2/3 of the way down 93. He says here on 144, the blind man's cane has ceased to be an object for him. It is no longer perceived for itself. Rather, the cane's furthest point is transformed into a sensitive zone. It increases the scope and the radius of the act of touching and has become analogous to a gaze. The point is, in all those layers of habituation I was talking about, you're kind of making your body bigger. Right, because you're grappling with a thing or a situation, and you're changing it from an alien thing you have to grapple with to a familiar thing you now have coupled with. So you no longer fight against it, you now work with it. You now live from your coupling with it. So that habitual body you have is also a thing that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's not so in a way, when I say your habitual body is holding together a world for you, well, your habitual body actually kind of is that world. You kind of live from and through that world, and so things in your environment are not alien objects you contend with. They're inconspicuous dimensions of your comfortable platform from which you live and engage in those explicit things that you care about. So all those layers of habit I'm talking about are building in this level of intelligence. But that intelligence is itself an inherently material intelligence. It is the intelligence that animates a situation. It's not a representational thought. It's the living meaning that holds something together into a dynamic functioning thing. And that thought that is embodied not just in the body that knows these organic limits, but it's in this thing coupled with things outside it. So the body you live from is a big thing. It's got your cane and your clothes, but it's also your living room and maybe your city, So I want you to think about that, about the idea of incorporation. And then this last point, though, he says on a point I've already made, but 145, again, about 10 lines down, he says, but if habit is neither a form of knowledge nor an automatic reflex, so neither strictly a matter of psychology as is often understood, nor strictly a matter of physiology as that is often understood, but really it's a matter of having a world, of a matter of existing in the sense that he said before, or of a kind of intelligence that is inherently embodied. If habit is neither a form of knowledge nor an automatic reflex, then what is it? He says it is a question of a knowledge in the hands. I mean, he's just making the point we made before about a bodily recognition, and the thing I've been saying about this too. But so the thing that you want to get then is that idea of this intelligence that is inherently bodily, embodied, and that's a body that's inherently involved and with a larger body that it has incorporated into itself, and that body is a level of, is itself the materialization of a kind of intelligence, and that's the intelligence that provides the presupposed platform of guaranteed meaning that allows you to live as the self-responsible agent you typically think yourself to be. So that's where I want to stop. And let me just repeat a thing I said before. What I'm really trying to do is get you to think now about the very issues we talked about in Hegel, especially around the dialectic of recognition, and try to see those things in this story now about habit. That's kind of where we're at. So I'm going to leave it there. And that's our beginning of Phenomenology according to Merleau-Ponty. I said before he's my favorite. And I guess what I meant by that is, I feel like when you read Merleau-Ponty, phenomenology is just you just have such a visceral and intimate sense of what it is. It seems like such a meaningful and immediate personal thing. The content isn't particularly different from those other people, but the way he writes about it, I feel like it brings phenomenology to life in such a meaningful way, and I think that's why I especially like it. Feels very different than reading Kant or Hegel or Husserl or Heidegger. It's really great. Anyway, so I hope you enjoy reading that chapter, and I hope these things that I say help to illuminate. I guess chapters. That's really chapters 1 and 2 of the section on the body. Certainly, there's tons more, especially in the mechanistic physiology chapter about time in particular, which I haven't gone through. I might come back to it, but nonetheless, I hope what I've said helps you to get at what the core point there is about the phenomenology of the body, and what that's saying about our experience, what it's saying about intelligence, and also how it's allowing you to carry on so much of the stuff we already did in Kant and Hegel. And so we'll go on. I think, well, we'll see. I'm going to decide after I turn this off what the next thing is going to be. But anyway, we're going to move on through the part 1, the body. Okay.